My daughter-in-law called me at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Not my son. Her. That should have told me something right there. We're having dinner tonight with her parents, she said. Her parents. She'd been married to my son for 4 years and she still referred to her own family that way around me. Not Nora's parents. Not the Winthrops. Just her parents, like I was supposed to understand my place in the sentence. It's at Harrington's, 7 o'clock. Dress appropriately. I asked what that meant. It means don't wear that jacket you always wear. The grey one with the broken zipper. And please. She paused the way people pause when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. Just let the conversation happen. Don't try to steer it. I said, "Okay, sweetheart." She said, "I mean it, Walt." That was the whole call. 4 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits, and I still felt like I was being briefed before a job interview. My son Nolan texted me 20 minutes later. "Dad, she just wants tonight to go well." Her dad's kind of a big deal in Charlotte. Just go with the flow. Go with the flow. I put the phone down on my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the yard. The grass needed cutting. The gutters needed cleaning. I had a list somewhere. I've always had a list. I wore the grey jacket. I need to back up because you can't understand what happened at Harrington's without understanding who I am. And honestly, for most of my adult life, I worked very hard to make sure nobody could understand who I was. My name is Walt Cordell. I'm 63 years old. I live alone now in a house in Mooresville, North Carolina, about 30 miles north of Charlotte. It's a modest house. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a screened porch I never use as much as I should. I drive a 2019 Ford F-150 that has 60,000 miles on it and a dent in the rear bumper I keep meaning to fix. I wear khakis. I own one suit, charcoal grey, that I bought at JCPenney for my wife's funeral 9 years ago and have worn exactly 4 times since. To look at me, you'd guess I was a retired electrician, or maybe a school principal, something like that. Something comfortable and forgettable. What I actually am is considerably more complicated. When I was 26 years old, I started a small company in my garage. Not because I had a vision or a plan. I started it because I was laid off from the plant in Concord, and I had a pregnant wife, and I knew how to fix industrial conveyor systems, and I figured I could probably charge people for that. The company was called Cordell Mechanical Services. 3 employees, including me. 1 truck, a landline number, and an answering machine I checked twice a day. By the time I was 35, we had 40 employees and contracts with 4 manufacturing plants in the Carolinas. By 45, we'd expanded into predictive maintenance software. My head engineer, a quiet man named Benson who never took vacations, wrote most of the code himself, and we had regional offices in Greensboro, Columbia, and Knoxville. By 52, when my wife Patricia passed, the company had revenues of about $60 million a year. I sold it when I was 58. A private equity firm out of Atlanta. I won't say the exact number because it doesn't matter. And because I've found that specific numbers change the way people look at you in a way that makes everything worse, not better. I'll say it was enough. Enough that the interest alone, conservatively invested, covers every expense I will ever have for the rest of my life, and my son's life after that, and his children's lives after that. Nobody knew. That was the part that took some explaining, even to myself. Patricia knew, obviously. She was my partner in every sense. But Patricia died of ovarian cancer at 51, and she took a lot of things with her, including the one person who could look at me and see both versions at once. The man in the grey jacket and the man behind the balance sheets, after she was gone. I found I didn't have the energy to explain myself to anyone new. My son Nolan knew the company existed. He knew we'd done well. But I was careful with details, even with him. Not because I didn't trust him. Because I'd watched what money did to families over the years. I'd watched sons stop calling their fathers and start calling their fathers accountants. I'd watched marriages that were really just negotiations. I didn't want that for Nolan. I wanted him to build his own life without the weight of expectation. So I let him believe I was comfortable, enough comfortable. Not Harrington's on a Thursday comfortable. His wife, my daughter-in-law, Claire, had her own ideas about what comfortable looked like, and I was clearly outside them. Harrington's is the kind of restaurant where the menus don't have prices. I've eaten there twice in my life, once for a business dinner in 2011, once for Nolan and Claire's rehearsal dinner, which her parents paid for and which I was gracious about. I arrived at 6:55. Nolan met me at the door, which I appreciated. He looked nervous in the way he's looked nervous since he was 7 years old, with his jaw set slightly too tight and his eyes doing a slow scan of the room. "You wore the jacket," he said. "It's a good jacket." He looked like he wanted to say something else. He didn't. Claire's parents were already seated. Her father was a man named Harrison Winthropies. His name was Harrison, and the restaurant was called Harrington's. A coincidence that I noted and kept to myself. Who I knew by reputation more than anything. Retired federal judge, U.S. District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. Before that, a decade as a U.S. attorney, the kind of man whose name appeared on plaques in courthouses. Claire's mother, Beverly, was a small, precise woman who ran the Winthrop Family Foundation and sat on 3 hospital boards and had the posture of someone who had spent decades making other people feel underdressed. Claire introduced me with the same energy you'd introduce a piece of furniture that had arrived from the wrong store. "This is Walt, Nolan's dad. He's retired, so..." She let the "so" hang there doing work. "He's been in Mooresville." Judge Winthrop shook my hand. He was 70-something, silver-haired, with the kind of handshake that comes from 60 years of being taken seriously. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something shifted behind his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Looked at me again. "Walt," he said. "Judge Winthrop," I said. "Harrison, please." He was still looking at me. "Where did you have we met?" Claire said. "I don't think so, Dad," before I could answer. She said it the way you say it when you really mean they haven't. "I'm not sure," I said. Which was true. I meet a lot of people. We sat down. I was placed, and I want to be precise about this word, because placement at a table is its own kind of communication at the far end, around the corner from Beverly, who spoke mostly to Claire, and diagonally across from Harrison, who was at the head. Nolan sat between his wife and her mother, caught in the middle the way he'd been caught in the middle his entire adult life. The conversation moved in the way conversations move at that kind of dinner. Harrison mentioned a charity golf tournament he'd co-chaired. Beverly mentioned a renovation project at the foundation's new offices. Claire mentioned a promotion she was up for at the firm. Nolan talked about a project at work that I could tell he was slightly inflating for the audience. I ate my bread. I was doing exactly what I'd been asked to do, not steering, not contributing, going with the flow. Then Harrison said something that changed the evening. He was talking about a manufacturing company in the Piedmont that had been in the news, some environmental issue, a fine, a restructuring, and he made an offhand comment about predictive maintenance systems failing and how these companies cut corners and how he'd seen it in his time on the bench. Contractors who built things to fail. He said the name, Cordell Mechanical Services. As an example, a cautionary tale. He had the story completely wrong. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't offense. It wasn't even the need to defend myself exactly. It was more like watching someone describe a painting you made and getting the colors wrong, and the year wrong, and the artist wrong, a particular kind of quiet, cellular wrongness. I said, I think that case was actually resolved in the contractor's favor. Harrison looked at me. The table went a little still. I believe the maintenance records showed the failure was a specification error on the plant side. I said, not the contractors. The EPA finding was overturned on appeal, if I recall. If I recall? How would you know that? Claire said. Not hostile exactly. Just genuinely puzzled. Like a dog hearing a sound it hasn't heard before. Harrison was still looking at me. That shifting expression again. Slower now. "What?" he said. "Walt Cordell." "Yes, sir. Cordell Mechanical. That was my company." The table went from still to completely quiet. Beverly set down her wine glass. Nolan was looking at me with an expression I'd never quite seen on him before. Claire's face was doing several things simultaneously, none of them simple. Harrison leaned back in his chair. He had the particular controlled stillness of a man who had presided over surprise for 50 years and was not going to let a restaurant see him lose his composure. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," I said. "It was an honest mistake." "I knew that case," he said. "I knew it well. I was on the federal bench when the appeal went through the circuit." He paused. "I remember reading the brief. The company that had built those systems, the maintenance protocols, were some of the most meticulous documentation I'd seen. I remember thinking whoever ran that operation understood the work at a fundamental level." He looked at me. "That was you." "That was my team," I said. "I had good people." Nolan said quietly, "Dad." I looked at him. He was looking at me like he was doing math in his head and kept arriving at the same number and couldn't believe it. I should explain something about what came next, because the narrative instinct is to turn this into a moment of triumph. The grey jacket vindicated. The man at the end of the table revealed. Claire humbled. Beverly re-evaluating. The judge nodding with sage approval. That's not exactly what happened. Or rather, it is what happened on the surface. But the truth underneath it is more uncomfortable, and I think it's the part worth saying. After Harrison placed me after the name registered, and the company registered, and he understood what he was looking at, the conversation changed. Beverly turned her chair a degree toward me. Claire stopped managing the table and started watching it. Nolan relaxed in a way that made me realize how tense he'd been for the previous 40 minutes. Harrison asked about the sale. I told him roughly. He asked about what I was doing now. I told him mostly. I told him about the portfolio, the charitable work, the small angel investments I'd been making in manufacturing startups in the Carolinas because I couldn't fully stop being interested in the work. He asked about Patricia. I told him about her. He listened the way people with good character listen fully, without filling the silence. At some point, Claire said, "I had no idea." She meant it as a simple statement of fact, but it landed in the air like something more complicated. And here's the thing I've turned over in my head since that night. The thing I came home and sat on the screen porch thinking about until nearly midnight. She was right. She had no idea. And whose fault was that? I'd spent years perfecting invisibility. I'd decided long ago that keeping my real life private protected me from a particular kind of shallowness, a particular kind of people who would love the balance sheet instead of the man. I'd watched it happen to colleagues. I'd watched marriages corrode under the weight of wealth. I'd made a choice. But choices have costs. And one of the costs of my choice was that I walked into that restaurant as a man my daughter-in-law was slightly embarrassed by. A man her parents didn't know what to do with. A man assigned to the end of the table. I let that happen. Not entirely. Not without reason, but I let it happen. The other cost was Nolan, my son, who had spent 4 years in a marriage to a woman who didn't fully respect his father, who couldn't fully defend me because he didn't fully know me either, who had been navigating something quietly alone that he never should have had to navigate at all. I looked at him across that table in Harrington's, and I felt the particular grief of a parent who realizes they've been protecting their child from one thing by exposing them to another. We stayed until the restaurant was mostly empty. Harrison picked up the check before I could, and I let him, because it was his table and his daughter, and it was the right thing to let him have. In the parking lot, Nolan walked with me to my truck. We stood there for a minute without talking. It was a cool night. The kind of October cool that Charlotte does well, with the leaves starting to turn on the trees along the street. He said, "How much of the company did you not tell me?" "Most of it," I said. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. I'd thought about how to answer it for 30 years, in different forms, and I'd never found an answer that was fully adequate. "Because I watched money change people," I said, "and I didn't want to watch it change you." He was quiet for a moment. "You could have trusted me." "I know." I'm not angry," he said. He was working through it in real time, the way he's worked through things since he was a boy, slowly and out loud. I wish I'd known. Tonight I kept thinking, she talks to you sometimes like you don't count, and I never knew how to. He stopped. "I know," I said again. "She's going to have a lot to say when we get home," he said. "Probably," I said. He laughed a little. "Not much. I don't think she expected that. I didn't expect her to call you and tell you what jacket to tell me not to wear," I said. "We're full of surprises." He laughed a little more. Then he was quiet again. I put my hand on his shoulder. He's 51 years old and he still lets me do that, which is something I'm grateful for every time. "Here's what I know," I said. "Your mother would have handled all of this better than I did. She would have found a way to be honest without making it into a thing. I made it into a thing." I paused. "You deserve a father who's actually present, not just financially secure and technically in the room." He nodded. He was looking at the ground. "And Claire," I said, "is not a bad person. She's a person who values certain things, and she didn't have complete information. That's different from bad." He looked up at me. "You're being very generous right now." "I'm trying," I said. We stood there another minute. The restaurant lights behind us, the parking lot quiet. "What are you going to do with all of it?" he asked. He didn't mean the money exactly. He meant the whole thing, the arrangement I'd built, the privacy, the years of being the man in the grey jacket. I thought about what Harrison had said to me inside, near the end of the night when Beverly and Claire had gone to get their coats. He'd leaned across the table and spoken quietly, not as a father-in-law or as a judge, just as one older man to another. He'd said, "The years I spent on the bench, I saw what happened when people built their lives around what they were hiding. The hiding eventually becomes the whole thing. You start protecting the secret more than you protect the people." I'd thought about Patricia when he said it. I'd thought about Nolan. I'd thought about the fact that my daughter-in-law had called me at 2 in the afternoon to tell me not to embarrass her. And I had said, "Okay, sweetheart," and I had felt, in some specific and shameful place, that she wasn't entirely wrong to worry. I had let myself be that man, for reasons that made sense to me. But I had let it happen. To Nolan in the parking lot, I said, "I think I'm going to stop hiding." He looked at me. "Not the money specifically," I said. "Just myself. I've been somewhere in the back of the room for a long time. I think I've earned the front." He didn't say anything. He just nodded, slowly, in the way he nods when something has settled. We hugged. He got in his car. I watched him pull out of the lot. On the drive home to Mooresville, I passed the exit for Concord, the town where the plant was, where I was laid off at 26 with a pregnant wife and nothing else to lose. I've driven past that exit hundreds of times without thinking about it. That night, I noticed it. I thought about the garage where I started the company, the folding table with the landline on it, the answering machine, Benson, who wrote the code and never took vacations, Patricia, who kept the books in the early years on a legal pad at the kitchen table, and who believed in the work with a completeness I never fully deserved. I thought about what it cost to disappear into humility when humility is actually a form of control, when being invisible is a way of never being judged and never being wrong and never being looked at and found wanting. When the grey jacket isn't modesty, it's armor. Patricia knew. She told me once, sometime in our 40s, that I used plainness like a weapon, that I made people underestimate me and then I was quietly superior about it. She said it gently. She said it because she loved me. I disagreed with her at the time. I don't disagree with her at the time. I don't disagree with her anymore. The thing about living quietly is that it can be genuinely good. There's real peace in it, real integrity. And it can also be a story you tell yourself. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. They can exist in the same life, in the same decision, in the same grey jacket. I'm 63 years old. My wife is gone. My son is in a marriage that is going to require some renegotiation, and I played a role in why. The man I built careful, invisible, private served some good purposes and caused some real harm. I don't think the answer is to become someone different. I think the answer is to stop pretending that the choice doesn't have costs. Harrison Winthrop called me the following Monday. He asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime. Not a big thing, just coffee, because he was involved with a workforce development initiative in the region, and he wanted to pick my brain about the manufacturing sector. I said yes. He said, "Good, and won't bring whatever jacket you want." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind I haven't had enough of. I'm going to stop sitting at the end of the table, not because I have $448 million, or because a federal judge knows my name, or because my daughter-in-law now sets my place at the center. I'm going to stop because Patricia was right, and because my son deserved better, and because the work was real, all of it. The garage and the folding table and the $60 million in revenue and the sale and the quiet years after and real work doesn't need to hide. The grey jacket has a broken zipper. I'm going to get it fixed. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since that night at Harrington's. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet way you think about things when you're 63 and driving home alone on a dark highway and the radio is off. Every outcome in that dinner had a root. Claire didn't decide one afternoon to treat me like furniture. That grew over years, fed by 1,000 small signals I sent. The broken zipper, the old truck, the way I'd answer questions about my work with the shortest possible answer, and change the subject. I built that version of myself deliberately. And then I was genuinely surprised when people believed it. That's not wisdom. That's a man outsmarting himself. The thing about hiding, and I mean really hiding, not just being private, but actively constructing a smaller version of yourself for the world to consume, is that it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. I thought I was protecting Nolan from the distortions that money creates. What I was also doing, without fully understanding it, was leaving him without a defense. He couldn't explain me because I'd never explained myself to him. He sat in that restaurant for 40 minutes carrying something he never should have had to carry alone. That's on me. The intention was good. The cost was real. Harrison said something I've turned over a dozen times since. He said that in his years on the bench, the people who built their lives around what they were hiding eventually lost track of the difference between the secret and themselves. I think that's exactly right. I think I'd been so careful for so long that careful had become its own kind of character flaw. Dressed up as humility, functioning as control. Patricia knew it. She told me in our 40s, and I was too sure of my own reasoning to hear her. That's the particular stubbornness of intelligent people. We're very good at constructing arguments for what we already want to do. I wanted the simplicity of invisibility. I built a case for it. I called it integrity. Real integrity, I think, is harder than that. It's not just refusing to show off. It's also refusing to hide. It's standing in your actual life and letting people see it clearly, and trusting that the people worth keeping will stay. I failed that test for decades. Not completely. I had Patricia. I had the work. I had Nolan in the ways I allowed myself to have him. But there was always a wall. And I was always the one who built it. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this, and I think some of you will, is that the wall doesn't protect you as much as you think it does. It just moves the damage to a different address. Your children carry it. Your relationships carry it. Eventually, a dinner happens, and a judge says your name out loud, and the version of yourself you built comes apart in a restaurant over the halibut. That night, I got in my truck and drove home and sat on my screened porch and thought about what it would mean to just stop making myself small, not to become someone different, not to announce anything, just to be present as the full person I actually am, without apology, without theater, without the broken zipper as a costume. I'm 63. There's still time to do that right.